Spoiler alert, I'm going to be talking about two Godzilla movies, Godzilla Minus One and the MonsterVerse Godzilla. In the last year plus some change, we got two of these Godzilla movies. Um, One was a very serious, scary movie about redemption and a complex examination of sacrifice, the danger of despair, found family. And then there was Godzilla X Kong, which was about giant monsters fighting each other in nifty environments. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed Godzilla X Kong for what it was. Silly popcorn fluff, mostly fun but forgettable. It had the same problems most of the monsterverse movies have, which is boring human characters and a plot that is really about gimmicks. Now, what do I mean by gimmicks? I mean that in the fantasy genre, you have a very interesting fact that other genres don't have. Fantasy itself has kind of a double-edged strength to it that is its biggest weakness. And in fantasy, I can make absolutely anything happen, which means the story has the ability to depict psychologically accurate and very complex truths about the human condition in metaphorical and symbolic ways, which can therefore give you deep resonance with the audience, lasting and meaningful. It also means you can be extremely silly and just throw zany things together just for the hell of it. And nobody can really say anything because you can just shrug and say, well, it's fantasy. So the latter kind of fantasy genre fiction I call gimmickry. It's when the creator of a piece of fantasy is really just cooking up bizarre, shiny stuff for no real reason other than it's shiny and bizarre. It's attention grabbing. It may capture kind of a what if vibe and can really maybe grab your attention for about 5 minutes. But then once the novelty is exhausted, you've got really not much left and it's on to the next TikTok video. YouTube short, excuse me. Godzilla X Kong is like this. If there is a theme in here, it's something super obvious like teamwork is good or something. Godzilla and Kong are reduced really to cute monsters that lay waste to national monuments or sleep in them. They never really hurt anybody of consequence. And hey, they're protecting us from other, even nastier monsters out there that want to hurt us. And Kong has a hurt tooth, poor big guy. He needs help. So anyway, there's also the Scar King, who is a big, bad, giant ape. And he's bad because he makes other giant apes lug around boulders for no reason. And that's bad. And he has this magic thingy that he controls a huge ice lizard that's bigger than Godzilla. And let's throw them all together like a huge Pokemon. And boom, bam, kabow, kaboom. I do think it's interesting about monster movies in that we all kind of identify a little bit with the monster, even when he's depicted as a straight up villain like in Godzilla Minus One. It's kind of like deep down we all know that nature can straight up kill you without remorse and demands respect as a result. So even when you're actually rooting for the human characters, which is an incredible feat in that Godzilla movie, but they accomplished this in Godzilla Minus One. Even in that case, you still have sneaky affection for Godzilla and you demand that he be given his due. Now, Godzilla X Kong is fun. I can't deny that. It's ludicrous. It makes very little sense. It really isn't about anything except making money and providing silly whiz-bang entertainment. It's not pretentious, at least. It's not sleazy. It's not really cynical. And it doesn't have any, well, that just happened kind of humor in it, which I absolutely hate. So I do appreciate that. But then let's take a look at Godzilla Minus One. Uses the exact same symbol, Godzilla, image, I should say, in a very different way. Here, Godzilla is not used as a fun gimmick at all. Instead, he's a potential emotional symbol, a potent emotional symbol of something very real, despair and fear, and much more. In fact, the entire story is a deep examination of the idea of sacrifice for the greater good, honor, self-worth, the value of life in someone who's expected to die for his country but refused. It has some very pointed things to say about the Japanese government, too, as well. Nobody's above critique in this. I think choosing a kamikaze pilot who refused to kill himself because he promised his parents that he would live for the main character, Shikishima, is a stroke of genius. This makes his arc loaded with conflict, turmoil, contradiction. He's a fascinating character in and of itself. There's others there too that are also very excellent, other characters, but to keep this video length manageable, I'll just focus on him and Godzilla. Which brings us to the fantastical element and the point of this video, the difference between illusion and imagination. In these two movies, Godzilla provides the contrast. In Godzilla -1, Godzilla is more than just a cool monster like he is in the Monsterverse. The story is more than just the fun of watching him wreak havoc. In Godzilla -1, he's a powerful symbol. Godzilla here is not just a cool gimmick. Looking at this narrative as if it were a dream, it follows dream logic perfectly. And this is the difference between illusion fantasy and imagination fantasy. The latter follows patterns that dreams would with respect to the main characters, whereas the former doesn't. It's just wild imagery for the heck of it. Viewing the external events as mirroring his inner chaos, Godzilla is a very vivid and resonant symbol of the inner forces at work in Shikishima's tortured psyche. But at the same time, it's also the external dream and despair and dread of post-war Japan on a mass level. So this is something that many people most likely felt. And Godzilla becomes then a symbol of that you can't do outside of a fantasy genre type story. All you can do is maybe talk about it and give it, vague illusions and stuff like that. But man, you don't get the same level of punch that you can when you can just depict it as a straight up ginormous monster. Godzilla stomps through cities without pity or remorse, without reason. He's a great symbol of the unconscious without the saving grace of the self. It has come to tear the ego apart. And this actually happens to people. This happens in the case of severe trauma. I've seen it firsthand. The unconscious will destroy the ego in an attempt to start over when trauma hits a certain critical point. And what's interesting is that this movie knows this at one point and shows this effect on the main character. At one point, he even gets delusional. His PTSD gets so bad, he starts thinking that maybe he actually died and everything that he's experiencing is a hallucination of a dead man. It's heartbreaking and it's very powerful. In fact, his survivor guilt and self-loathing makes him self-destructive. And Godzilla is a very concrete visual spatial symbol of just that kind of mass destruction within the psyche, but it's projected out onto the environment. Throughout the movie, we're reminded that for Shikishima, the war isn't yet over for me. He says that a couple times, which means he essentially plans to kill himself. I mean, he's lost his parents, he's lost his would-be girlfriend, he flies off to try to stop Godzilla from annihilating Tokyo with his airplane full of bombs. He was a kamikaze pilot, and he felt tremendous guilt for not destroying himself the way he was ordered to do. He's shamed for it several times in the movie. So he figures, I'm going to undo all that. But he's got this adorable little girl at home that he's been raising who isn't even his, which I think is another stroke of genius. Nevertheless, it shows us that a piece of his character that's very fascinating. Despite all of this death and destruction and guilt and horror, he's got that spark of humanity within him. And his choice and those of his previous enemy in this, the human enemy anyway, make the final argument of this film, which is that life must be chosen over death, even if you don't want that. That's a powerful theme. I think Godzilla -1 will go down as one of the best, if not the best, Godzilla movies ever made. And it also gives us a great example when you compare this to the Monsterverse Godzilla that came out, which is fun, but it shows you the difference in fantasy narratives of how it can be used in two different ways. On one way, it can be used to create fun illusions that are entertaining but forgettable. But on the other hand, you can also use this exact same principle of storytelling to create these very resonant symbols of true inner dynamics. And that's what I mean when I say those kinds of things about fantasy genres. This is the kind of stuff that I used when I wrote King of the Forgotten Darkness, which will be out next year. And you can pre-order it now. So anyway, if you enjoyed all this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Sign up for my newsletter as well at ericgoodwyn.com. And until then, I will see you next time.